On the show today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Paul White, the co-author of The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. If you're a fan of The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, you are going to love this adaptation that helps us understand how we can communicate better with our staff and co-workers. There's lots of aha moments in this discussion, so let's get going. This is the Vacation Rental Success Podcast, keeping you up to date with news, views, information and resources on this rapidly changing short-term rental business. I'm your host, Heather Bayer, and with 25 years of experience in this industry, I'm making sure you know what's hot, what's not, what's new, and what will help make your business a success. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Success Podcast. This is your host, Heather Bayer. I'm super excited to be back with you once again. And this is exciting, you know. It was 2018 when I had a message from my friend Tyann Marsink asking if I'd like to join her and Andy McNulty, the founder of TouchStay, to deliver a presentation at the then Northwest Vacation Rental Professionals Conference in Bend, Oregon. I would jump at the chance of working with Tyann and Andy any day, so she didn't have to twist my arm at all, and I'd never been to Bend, so that was an easy choice. But then she told me she was developing a session around the topic of the 5 love languages. I'd read the book and I'd done the test, which told me a lot about my relationships. My preferred love language is acts of service, and the one at the bottom of my list is receiving gifts, which explains why I value my partner cleaning up after Christmas dinner more than any gift he could give me. In fact, receiving gifts is at the bottom of both our preferences, so we actually gave up exchanging gifts years ago, and we actually enjoy our relationship more when we offer acts of service to each other. I mean, Phil loves it. If on a Thursday morning at 7 o'clock and he wakes up and he goes, "Oh my gosh, I've got to get the garbage out," and I say, "I've already done it, honey. It's already done." I mean, most weeks he's already up. He's up and done it. But if he has a lie-in or oversleeps, then he will wake up to find it has been done. And that's an act of service. And I love it at the end of a meal when he picks up all the dishes and he cleans up. And he always unloads the dishwasher every morning. These things are of huge value to me. Anyway, that aside, Tyann had figured out that if we understood these love languages and how people's preferences work, we could use the knowledge to communicate much better with both our guests and our owners. It was a really fun session, and I think we opened up a few channels for better relationships with our clients. Of course, we can't ask our guests and our owners to do the test, but we could be more creative in the ways we communicated to ensure that we appealed to every love language. So I never forgot the impact that presentation had on me. So when I heard of the new book called The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, which is co-written by Gary Chapman and Dr. Paul White, I was intrigued. In fact, that was written in 2019, and I've only come across it in the last 6 months or so. But the authors believe that most relational problems in organizations flow from this one question: do people feel appreciated? And by teaching you to effectively communicate really authentic appreciation and encouragement to everybody you work with, employees, co-workers, leaders, the book helps you answer yes to that question: do people feel appreciated? So in today's episode, I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Paul White to help us understand how we can create better relationships with others in any workplace. Dr. White is a psychologist, author and speaker. He's written articles for and he's been interviewed by the BBC News, Business Week, the New York Times, CNN, Entrepreneur.com, The Fast Company, etc. And he's also the co-author of this best-selling book, The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, written with Dr. Gary Chapman, who's the author of The 5 Love Languages. The 5 Languages of Appreciation has now sold over 600,000 copies, and I have one of them and love, love, love this book. So we'll be talking more about it, obviously, at the end of the interview, at the end of this episode. So I'm excited to bring you this interview. So without further ado, let's listen. I am super delighted to have with me today Dr. Paul White, PhD, who is the co-author of the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, co-authoring with Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote the 5 Love Languages. So I am just blown away with having the opportunity to talk to Dr. White. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Heather.
This is going to be a lot of fun because when I come across something new, I get really attached to it and really enthusiastic and motivated. And I can't get enough of the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace at the moment. So this podcast episode will add to that. And hopefully we'll be able to share this amongst many of our listeners, property managers out there, and more so perhaps even those, people who are not property managers yet, who are out there listening and thinking that they may want to be property managers in the future, and using something like this to get them off to a good start, I think is a huge benefit. So can I ask you, first of all, Paul, I've already talked about all your appearances on BBC and CNN and in the introduction, but perhaps you can just give us a quick background into why you got into 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace with Dr. Chapman in the first place.
Sure. So, I'm a psychologist by training and done a variety of things. So at mid-career, I was working with family-owned businesses and dealing with the family issues that are intertwined with running the business and then business succession and in transferring across generations. And I was dealing with a family in North Carolina and talking to the dad, who's the CEO. I said, how's the plan going? And he says, it's going fine. My son's stepping up. I think it's going to work. I walk across the hall and I ask the son the same question. And he says, this is a disaster. It's never going to work. I can't ever please my dad, which I could understand. I grew up in a family-owned business, so I sort of understood that context. And my wife and I were rereading actually the 5 love languages at that time. And I thought, I wonder if this could, maybe help in business relationships. So I pursued Dr. Chapman. It took me a year to get past his assistant and be able to meet with him and pitch the idea. And we agreed to work together on this and started actually, obviously conceptually, but then started the online assessment and then training materials and then wrote the book. So it's been a great process.
Well, can you explain the concept of the 5 Languages of Appreciation?
Sure. It's one of the things I had to get past as a psychologist. It's not very intellectually demanding. It's not tough. It's that not everybody feels appreciated in the same way, and that intellectually we assent to that. But if we look at what we do or other people do, pretty much we do the same 1 or 2 things for everybody. Often we start with what we value and then maybe expand a little bit. But that, just like in personal relationships, people feel loved in different ways. So in work settings, people feel valued and appreciated by different kinds of actions. And if we don't use the right action for the right person, it's basically a waste of time and energy and doesn't really get the impact that we want.
Well, when I started out learning about the 5 love languages, in fact, a friend of mine, a lady called Tyann Marsink Hammond, she's very innovative. And she comes up with these great ideas for presentations. And she said, let's do a presentation on the 5 love languages and apply it to our guests and our owners. And we're going, how do you do that? This is about love. It's about connections. And she said, well, absolutely. This is what we have. This is, we have these connections, these relationships with our guests and with our owners. And we said, well, how do we know what their love language is? Do we ask them? Do we get them to do a test? And her idea was, well, no, he said, as long as we understand that people have different ways of communicating and giving and receiving love in communication, then we make sure we apply something for every different aspect of the love languages. And it was such fun doing that presentation because we had to come up with all the ideas. How do we use physical touch, for example, to demonstrate some communication with a guest who might have physical touch as their primary love language? And we started talking about soft fabrics and furnishings and things that they could touch, the more kinesthetic type of thing. So we got very creative with that. Yeah. But for anybody who is listening, who perhaps hasn't read the 5 love languages and is perhaps wondering whatever are they talking about? Yes. Can you just briefly talk about those 5 love languages we'll go into how they're applied in the workplace, but let's start with the basics.
Sure. So they're the same in name. The languages of appreciation are the same in name as the 5 love languages, but they look differently, obviously, in how they're applied in daily life. But words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and even physical touch, which is always an interesting one. But yeah, we felt like it's really communicating value to people in the workplace, and those largely flowed over. Obviously, physical touch, we had to talk about, and we'll dive into that. But yeah, the same concepts apply across different kinds of relationships.
So, I've been on this planet quite a while, and my early stages of working, way back maybe in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, this sort of thing would perhaps not have gone down very well because it was very structured. It was a different type of workplace than we're in now. Yes. How has the concept of the workplace changed over time, and particularly in the last few years?
Oh, yeah, especially the last few years. But one thing, which I just published a blog about Generation Z, one characteristic is that as we've moved on, things have become more informal, right? I mean, both as far as appropriate dress, but the type of interactions and relationships and titles and all that kind of stuff. So there's more of an informality. And for younger employees and team members, they're far more interested in soft kinds of issues of purpose and meaning, of work-life balance, of being valued for who they are. And so we've really sort of transferred into, and it's an interesting dynamic with technology too, because technology takes us to an impersonal place lots of time. And I think that's partly the need that we feel is that we're feeling disconnected because of technology replaces a lot of personal interactions.
I really enjoyed that article that you published in the newsletter, you've linked to in the newsletter this morning, and I posted that on LinkedIn. And in particularly, was one thing that grabbed me was that Gen Z are more prone to wanting to give their opinions, regardless of how experienced they are, and that really got me. I mean, I know I've got grandchildren that are going to be the Gen Z going out into the workplace in a number of years' time, and they're already making their opinions quite well known. So that was interesting. I'll put a link to that article at the end of the show notes to make sure everybody has a chance to have a look at it. But you talk a lot about in the book about peer appreciation. Mm-hmm. So what are the benefits? Because as I say, going back to my early days of the workplace, it didn't really matter if your peers appreciated you. It was all, does your supervisor appreciate you? Right. Because there is a performance review coming up. Right. But things have changed over time, for sure. I mean, there used to be a saying, you probably remember this, you don't leave a job, you leave a manager. I mean, that the supervisory relationship was so important at that time. And that's really changed now, that people are more interested in connecting with and working with collegially with their peers and their colleagues. And so team member relationships are far more important than they used to be. And in some ways, the supervisor direct report relationship has diminished in its influence, not totally, obviously, but so peer relationships and peers in the sense of
really probably same aged peers, that not just at a sort of organizational peer level that you're at the same, level of manager or supervisor, but that how those with whom you identify think and feel about you is really important.
Yeah, I've been watching a British sitcom, sort of sitcom, but it's called Trying. It's about a couple that are trying to adopt a child. But the lead actress in it, in that role, works in a call center, and she's millennial, but she's working alongside a Gen Z, and they've captured this relationship so well, and the differences and challenges of actually communicating between them. So that just came to mind there.
Yeah, until recently, it was really us boomers, because I'm part of that group, that were largely the target and source of a lot of irritation. But it's moved down, right? I mean, it's moved down to millennials and Gen X and Z, that the issues of communication of different values are the same. They look differently, but between generations. And so, whether it's a millennial that's doesn't understand or agree with how a Gen Z person thinks, the tension is similar.
So in talking about the languages of appreciation in the workplace, do you feel that understanding these will make those communication gaps and differences, will iron them out in some way?
Well, it's interesting that I was just meeting with a couple of probably Gen X people at a organization and talking about our resources. And they said, oh, let's do this with our team. And there's this excitement about a sense of both self-discovery and also how you're the same or different from others, right? And that largely, it differs, but a lot of people, I want to know how you feel valued and appreciated or encouraged. Because, if you're, struggling, I want to encourage you. And I don't want to waste time doing things that aren't important. Mm-hmm. So I think it is a mechanism, a tool that helps facilitate more clear communication to really the heart or motivation of another person.
So let's break them down. Let's break down these 5 languages and have a chat about each one, because I think this is going to be interesting. I want to start with words of affirmation, because that's what we used to get for the performance review. Is that's what you're looking for, is that praise. You did right. Really, really well, and you did well on this, and so. How can we express those words of affirmation in ways that truly connect with somebody else?
Yeah, well, first, they're simple conceptually in that they're words that are affirming, right? We're affirming the value or worth of a person or of their work, and that's a difference that we make between appreciation and recognition. Employee recognition historically, been programs, and it's sort of, I think, disintegrated into lesser value kinds of activities, but about doing well. And we believe that employees and team members have value as persons, that we're people. We're not just production units and sales people. And so that actually frees up a lot of capability to affirm people, because it doesn't have to be about work, because employee recognition tends to only approach, or impact about 10 or 15% of the top workforce. Well, you have this big middle group that if they don't hear something, they get discouraged and they actually leave. And so the key for effective words of affirmation is to be specific. We actually do a poll. We have 100,000 people on our newsletter list, and we do polls occasionally, and we asked what you don't like to hear, and good job is one of the things, because it's too vague and it doesn't really mean anything. It didn't take any thought or effort. And so being very specific about that person, either a character quality that you value about them, dependability or integrity, whatever it might be, or, a specific task that they did well and you want to call attention to that.
So can you give me some other examples? Just, because the one that came to my mind was the good job.
Yes.
As being, less than helpful in
Yes.
in terms of communication.
So, I mean, it might be as simple as Cynthia, thanks for staying late after the meeting and cleaning up the room, the conference room. That way, it's ready to go in the morning when we have a meeting first thing in the morning. So we tend to encourage people to use their name, be specific, and then why it's important to you or the organization. Or it could be something that's not performance-based. It could be, Steve, I just really enjoy your sense of humor. It lightens the room. You have a delightful laugh and smile, and it just helps, keep a positive atmosphere. But it can be not about work, because sometimes somebody's still learning their job and doing well, but you want to call attention to something. So it could be, Sarah, I'm just impressed how you're training for this half marathon, and just that you have the discipline to do that. I think that's cool. It'd be hard for me to do. So it's just that you want to get specific about something you've observed and call attention to it.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, I was playing pickleball at the weekend, and I'm an intermediate player, and I was playing with a couple of advanced players, and they just annihilated us. But at the end, when we said thank you over the net, thank you for beating us bloody, and I said, I really appreciate the time that we've had playing with you, because it does help as an intermediate player to have that experience. And this one player she said, "Oh, thank you so much for saying that." And it, clearly that had got to her, that I just, I actually was very thankful that I got that experience, because, it put me right in my place and told me that I'm really not as good as I think I am.
Well, with each of these, one of the things is that, one of the obstacles that we have to deal with is perceived busyness, and everybody's busy, right? But we believe that if you get the right language and the right action, it doesn't take much to have a lot of impact. And so that's the goal. We want to help identify the language and actions that are important to the different people, so that you're not writing notes to everybody or spending time with everybody, and a lot of that's wasted.
Yeah, we're going to come back a bit later and figure out how we find out what everybody's language of appreciation is, because I just wonder if it can come across as contrived. Oh, I've got to say something to this person of appreciation. So is it likely to come out as less than natural if you're really thinking about it?
Well, it can, but one of the things that we know is that the more specific you are about what you value, the more likely it's to be perceived as authentic or genuine. The more vague, it's like, whatever. You just sort of blew smoke at me. So that kind of thing.
Let's talk about quality time now. I used to work at Reader's Digest in England many, many years ago in their customer service department, and I had a manager that door was always shut. And if you had a problem, you'd knock on the door and just gently open it. and I'm busy. Well, I just need 5 minutes of your time. And it was, when I was looking, I was going through the book, that experience really came back to me. Quality time is my second preference. Acts of service followed by quality time.
So quality time is, we found to be an interesting one. It was actually the one that led us to create a deeper version of our inventory, because I had early on a manager tell me, hey, one of my team members has quality time. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do? And so we've then gone back and retooled it, that we give people a number of actions, and it could be go to lunch together and talk about work, or go to lunch together and not talk about work. But one of the other things that we found over time is that there are really some generational differences. For those of us that are older, quality time really was time with our supervisor or manager, that we got time either to ask questions and get input, or to be able to share some observations. And that was what that looked like. It was focused attention with them. For younger employees and team members, it's really about collegial and peer relationships. I tell older managers, I say, just because you have a team member that has quality time doesn't mean they want time with you. You may be wonderful, you may be great, but they want to hang out with their friends, go to lunch, go out to work afterwards. So, and it's obviously time with people you want to spend time with. But again, it doesn't take a lot of time. I had a CFO tell me, she said, my language is quality time. And I just want somebody to stop by and check in, see how I'm doing. And after 5 minutes, I'm booting them because I got too much to do. But just that action of initiating to check in is meaningful.
I expect that also means by giving full attention.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the way to torpedo quality time is to be doing something else, to multitask or to be distracted. So like even if you're in a restaurant and, looking over the shoulder at watching the sports, it really sends the message, I'm not really with you. You're not that important to me.
Yes, I think if anybody, and I've experienced this, and it's something that I was doing unknowingly, was not giving people full attention. And somebody brought it to my attention. I think it was at a conference, and we were having this discussion, and I must have looked as somebody walked past.
Right.
And she said, "Oh, is there somewhere you need to be?"
Yeah.
And that was a big eye opener for me, and I think that's worthwhile for people to think about. Watch check. It used to be watch checking when people wore watches, but now it's checking the notifications on a phone.
Yeah, not your phone, not keep typing on the computer if you're in your office, that kind of thing. Just stop giving your undivided attention.
Yeah, can you give a couple more examples of quality time? So we've got sort of
Sure. I mean, it's as simple as somebody maybe they want to. I met with these people yesterday, and it was over the lunch hour, and another person showed up and they said, "Hey, we just decided that we're going to have sort of an open lunch meeting one day a week, and people can come and just hang out and talk." And I guess a part about all this is that it's that you're sharing time and information that's personal. It's not that you're meeting together to talk about work. Mm-hmm. And that I think through COVID and the pandemic, we learned that work and life do flow over, and it's important to know some about one another's lives and how that's going and impacting our work. And so it can be as simple as that. It could be going for a walk together, during the lunch hour and just chatting and talking about, the Euro Cup, and what happened, or your favorite team, or what you did over the weekend. And it's often important, especially if it's a person that is a supervisor, to not just talk about work and also to share about themselves. Otherwise, it becomes feels like an interrogation,
Yeah.
How's your wife? How are your kids? What'd you do this weekend? Versus saying, hey, I got to go sailing with my brother this weekend. It was a nice time.
Yeah. Okay, what about let's move on to acts of service. Acts of service is my language,
Okay.
I love it when somebody offers to do something for me. I mean, I've just before I came down to start this interview, I was baking a cake with my granddaughter, and the kitchen was just an entire mess because kids like to get everything out. And I said, "Oh, look, I'm going to have to finish soon because I'm going to go and record an interview." And she said, "I'll clear all this up, Grandma." It's like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
And that's an act of service for me.
Yeah. Acts of service can be misperceived in the workplace in that it's not rescuing low-performing colleagues. It's not like you always have to sort of, save them from not doing their work. And culturally, in the U.S. at least, there's a barrier, and I think it's true in Western Europe as well, is that if somebody asks you, is there something I can do to help? Almost always the first response is, no, I'm good, mm-hmm. Thanks. And in some culture, you can take offense at it, like, what, you think I'm not capable? But you want to ask, because the thing you don't want to do is assume that you're looking at their situation and that they need help and you just dive in, because largely you're not going to do the right thing that they would view as helpful. Mm-hmm. But two situations are common in the workplace where acts of service are really meaningful. First is when you're working on a time-limited project that you're just banging away, trying to get it done. And it's what's something somebody can do to help make that go better, whether that's maybe answer your phone calls or answer your emails for today so you can stay focused on the project. Maybe bring in you lunch or snack so you keep working, or that you're able to delegate part of it to them and say, hey, if you would copy the stuff and sort of put it together for the presentation, that'd be helpful. So you need to find out what is important to them and then do it at their way. It's not helpful to teach them a new way, which is your way, to do it. And the other situation is when, like in service kinds of settings where, say, at a dental office, everybody shows up all at once and the front desk is sort of flooded. It's what can you do to help the receptionist out, whether that's answer the phones or handle something else. So, and for access service, I mean, words are not only sometimes not meaningful, they actually can be negative if you're just sort of praising people but never helping out. I mean, I had one example shared that a graphic designer was working late trying to finish up a project, and the rest of the office was good to go, and they were headed out and go down to the sports bar to watch the game, and they said, hey, great job, hang in there, come on down when you're done. And she was just fuming that they didn't think to see if they could help out.
Yeah, it's very relevant in our short-term rental and vacation rental management industry, because it's a very fluid type of business. And busy times, a company and the staff may be handling a lot of people checking out and then having to do the cleaning before the next people check in. Yeah. And you can get to points where there's backups, things go wrong, there's maintenance issues, and just sending one cleaning team in and one maintenance person in may not simply be enough. And I can see that for those who really value acts of service as their language, then having somebody come and say, look, I can step in and give you an hour of my time to help get this property turned around so that it meets the company needs, meets the needs of the guests coming in, and eases your job. I can see where that is really, really beneficial.
And it's especially impactful when it's clearly not in that person's responsibilities, right? Even at a supervisor or above, and that they're doing it out of desire to help and encourage you. And that really creates a sense of gratitude and connection, which leads to people staying around and not leaving, as far as staff turnover and so forth.
So let's go on to tangible gifts, because this one is my lowest preference. Okay. And so I don't turn down a gift, but I don't value it. I don't value it in the same way. And I love to give gifts, but I don't value the receiving of it in the same way as I do if somebody says, let me do this for you, or let me help you out with this. But how can gifts be delivered best? Because I know from being in a workplace environment, it was often something that's almost paid lip service to, everybody gets a bottle of wine.
Yes.
At Christmas.
Right. So it's interesting. So we've had over 400,000 people take our online assessment. And so we have a pretty good data set. And in the US and Canada, 7% of employees choose tangible gifts as their main way to be shown appreciation, which is the least chosen one besides physical touch, which is less than 1%. But that's the one that we usually use. And actually, internationally, we just did some studies that it's actually lower in other countries. But the issue is that it's not bonuses, it's not raises. That's part of the employee-employer contract. But it's about something that's of value to them. And it's really has to be personal. It has to be about them to have meaning. That's where corporate gifts at Christmas are, you get a cheese and cracker fruit basket from one of your suppliers. It's from the company. It has no meaning. What the meaning is if one of the people that you work there with finds out what's valuable to you, that you really like chocolate covered cherries, and they give you a box of that, So it's really about being very specific and personal. And it's not about the monetary value at all. It can cost nothing. Like maybe you're starting to coach your child's soccer team, and one of the other team members knows about it and has some experience, and they send you a website with that has all kinds of training videos on it. That they thought about you and got something that was meaningful and appropriate to your life.
Yeah, while you were talking, actually, it got me thinking that I did get a gift relatively recently, and it was from a colleague that I know quite well, and he's a fellow Brit, and I'd given a consultancy referral to him, and then he asked for my address, and so I thought, yeah, there's a gift on the way.
Yeah.
But when it came, it was a hamper, and in it there were and he knows how much I love tea.
Okay.
So there was a variety. There was some Welsh tea in there. There was a book. There was a book on the history of tea and the history of tea making. And I love. I don't know if you've heard of Marmite.
Yes.
It's a particularly disgusting for some spread.
Right.
It's one of those love it or hate it things. And he's sent me Marmite before. But that, because it was, and everything in that hamper had been thought out. And it was personal to me. So the fact that receiving gifts is my least preferred language of appreciation, I absolutely loved that gift. Because it was personal and well, as we say, it's the thought that counts. That it was thoughtful.
Right. And it would be like, if you're a Manchester United fan and somebody gives you, a Chelsea, jersey or something, it happens here too, So anyway, yeah, it is about the thought, and it doesn't take a lot, but in one way, because they're typically valued not much by themselves, but one way to increase the value of the gift is to include it with one of the other languages, whether that's an act of service or quality time or whatever. But again, it has to be personal. And giving everybody the same thing at Christmas is just a waste and offensive, actually. And so I would say it's better not to give than to just give sort of that across the board.
Yeah, in the book you talk about bad gifts, bad gift ideas. The promo materials that left over from the recent conference that they just came back from.
Yes. I had one guy say, I thought my team was trying to kill me. He says, I'm a serious type 1 diabetic, and they gave me a box of candy. It's like, didn't pay attention to who he was.
Yeah. I think some very good points there. I think a lot of managers and think that giving a gift to their team is the thing that everybody's going to love, and then everybody gets exactly the same thing. It takes away that thought, I think. Physical touch. This was one when we had a lot of fun with the physical touch when we did our little presentation, and we really had to think about this because we're trying to adapt it to, our owners who are as property managers, our property owners are our primary clients, because if we don't have the properties, we've got nothing to rent to our guests.
Right.
So we're always thinking about, how can we create better relationships with our owners? So we started thinking about, oh gosh, physical touch. We're going to give them a hug when we meet them. Right. And then, of course, going on to think about it in the workplace. I think me, like anybody else who's begun to read the book, is they're going to be thinking, okay, how are they going to be handling the physical touch side of this?
Yeah. Right. So physical touch, when Dr. Chapman and I first started, we were like, do we include this? And we talked to people and got, but, obviously with the sexual innuendos or harassment or whatever. But for one reason, we didn't want to just advocate a touchless society, even in the workplace, because healthy, appropriate touch in healthy relationships can be deeply meaningful, especially when somebody's under a lot of stress and just a hand on the shoulder or something like that. But secondly, it happens. And so let's address it. And it's largely spontaneous celebration. It's, a high five when you finish a project, or a fist bump when you solve a problem, or a congratulatory handshake when you make a sale, and so forth. Now, it differs regionally and culturally. I mean, our materials are available in different languages. And so I lived in the South for a while in Atlanta, and they do a lot of side hugs down there. In New York, you sort of you nod across the room and say, hey, that's about what you do. But, our Hispanic and Latin American friends and Southern European are more physical. They kiss on the cheek with greeting. And so no physical touch feels very cold and impersonal to them. So you have to be aware of that. And obviously, it's the recipient who always gets to determine what's appropriate for them. And so it's just something to be aware of, and to note. And but literally, I had a friend. He finished a project with his assistant, and he's leaving, and she put up her hand for a high five. He said, "What am I supposed to do? Just leave her hanging?" It's like, you respond appropriately. Yes. But it's less than 1% that choose that as their primary language.
Okay. So we've talked about all these. It's talked about the 5 languages, and the important, really the higher level ones, shall we say, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, and the lesser ones, tangible gifts and physical touch. Right. How do we know in the workplace what our peers, what our colleagues, what our team members, what their languages are?
Yeah, and that's been a core challenge from the beginning, because in personal relationships, you can observe, you can ask, your wife or your spouse or kids or whatever. In our culture, typically, it's a weird conversation to say, if I'm going to show you appreciation, how should I do it? It feels sort of weird. Secondly, you're going to get, I don't know, tell me thanks, and that's it. So you don't get much. There's not really enough data points to observe people giving and getting appreciation to build that. And so that's really with the book, we give a code for the assessment. We've developed different versions for different industries, including long distance relationships and remote employees, to identify that, because again, it's not just the language, but the actions that are important. And so on our assessments called the Motivating by Appreciation Inventory, it identifies your primary and secondary language, your least valued one, but then goes back and gives you the choice of, within your primary language, your most preferred one, the actions that are most important to you, and also from whom, because you may want to get together and watch sports with your team members over the weekend, but you're not going to invite your supervisor, so you can specify that. So, and then we can create group profiles for teams, because it's fine and interesting to know your own language and actions, but it's the most important is to find out among your team members so that you can communicate in a way that's meaningful to them.
Yeah, I note on your website you can download stickers or
symbols.
Symbols. That's it. Yeah. That you can print off and put on your PC or computer, and this is my language of appreciation.
Right. Yeah, we actually have created a chart that for a team. We have in our hallway of a person's primary, secondary, and their actions. We had an article written about us in the New York Times that there were miners that took those symbols and had them printed up as stickers for their hard hats, so that they could just know from looking at each other's as they're working. So that's fun.
That is great. Paul, how can, before I wrap this up, you just mentioned remote workers. So I wanted to ask about, are there any specific things from any of these languages that can help with working with remote teams?
Yeah, we do research along the way. I published, 15 published papers or whatever. And we did one both pre-COVID, during COVID, after. And remote workers showing appreciation does require a little bit of different approach, in that first you have to be proactive, because it's not like you have a spontaneous interaction in the break room or you walk by their office, you don't see them. So you have to, think about them. And one way to do that is to have some kind of visual reminder of people. Secondly, that it's really important for peers to connect with one another remotely. obviously, a supervisor or a manager is going to reach out, but to keep your team members connected at a group level. And so we have one team member that's remote in Chicago. And so when we have team meetings, I mean, we focus on talking together. And the third part about that is that you're talking about personal information. You're not just talking about what you're doing, but hey, what'd you do this weekend? Or, how are your kids doing and so forth. And that's the way that connection is created. Most people are not really that connected to an organization. They're connected to other people. So if you want to keep your team members and your owners and so forth, you want to connect with them at a personal level.
Yeah, that's great. My company was entirely remote for 15 out of the 20 years before I sold it. And we had, we still have, in fact, one team member in the Philippines that's worked with us for nearly 12 years now. So never met her face to face. But we do understand that importance of giving that quality time so that, she can get to chat and have a meeting and not just be inputting data day in, day out without any connection.
And that's a key thing. When you have remote or team meetings via Zoom or whatever, it's important to allow time for personal conversation as if you were in a conference room where people would show up and they'd ask questions or share. But if you just get to the point, do the agenda, and then you're done, you don't have that connection that needs to be created.
Well, this has been great, and I've really enjoyed talking to you and getting a little bit more information on this. How can people who are listening connect with you and with your company if they're interested in finding out more?
Yeah, so our sort of mothership website is appreciationatwork.com, and it's the word at appreciationatwork.com. And also, I would be glad if they write me. I've got an email that I set up. It's just DrPaul@gmail. So DrPaul@gmail.com. And if they write me and, put your name or the podcast name in the subject line, then I'll send them a sample report of the inventory. I'll probably do the remote one so they can see that. And on the website, you can get books, you can get codes for your team members to take the assessment so that you can know together how to show that you value one another.
Well, that's great, and I'll put all that on the show notes. And I do encourage those of you listening to get this book, get it in your library, in your workplace or at your home, and let's as many people as possible read it. It is it's a fun read. Actually, I really enjoyed it. Enjoyed the 5 love languages. Obviously, enjoyed this one too. So there'll be a link to that as well. Dr. White, Paul, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I look forward to perhaps talking with you again, because I think I'd like to learn more.
Be glad to. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That was really great. It while we're talking, it got me thinking back to all the different places I've worked, and also got me thinking about the times over the 20 years of running my property management company when perhaps our communications broke down because I hadn't realized what language my team members preferred. And I've seen this with other organizations where somebody has said, well, I gave them these gifts and nobody seemed to care and I didn't get a thank you. Well, now maybe, you understand why that happens. So I think it really is worth exploring more. And if you've got questions about this, I'm going to spend more time with Dr. White over the next few weeks. We're perhaps going to be hopefully putting an article together that we can publish, which relates these languages of appreciation to our specific industry in a little more detail. So that's it from me for this week. It's always a huge pleasure to be with you. And of course, I'll be with you again in another 7 days. It's been a pleasure as ever being with you. If there's anything you'd like to comment on, then join the conversation on the show notes for the episode at vacationrentalformula.com. We'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to being with you again next week.